Hi class, welcome to session 2. Today we will continue our discussion about the Smith and Reagan model. In session 1 we were introduced to the Smith and Reagan model and the analysis and assessment portion of the model. Now we'll discover the instructional strategies of the model. Smith and Reagan believe that instructional strategies should be in 3 parts: organizational, delivery, and management strategies. Let's first focus on organizational strategies. Smith and Reagan discussed that the organizational strategy focuses on how instruction should be sequenced. The authors urge instructional designers to focus on these 3 questions: what content is needed, how should the content be presented, and how should it be sequenced. Smith and Reagan, in fact, started out by using Gagne's 9 events of instruction. They actually extended that and they added a generative and a supplantive instructional strategies, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Now, with those generative strategies, those are the student learning responsibilities. And when we talk about supplantive strategies, we're actually talking about what it is that the instructor is responsible for. So it could be, for generative, maybe it's the student's responsibility to establish a purpose, but it would be the instructor's responsibility to inform the learner of the purpose. For another example, it may be the student's responsibility to practice, but it's the instructor's responsibility to provide for and guide that practice. So Smith and Reagan basically just took Gagne's 9 events and added instructional and student responsibilities. Now let's talk about these delivery strategies. They deal with which medium works best and how learners will be grouped. Now, Smith and Reagan spent time in chapters 8 through 12 of their book addressing knowledge-specific delivery of instructions. They gave very detailed and prescriptive nature of instructional strategies, which is what makes their model very, very different from, again, we talked about that they spend a lot of time on the actual instructional part of their work. Now let's continue talking some more about the Smith and Reagan model. Let's talk about the sequence of instructional delivery. Smith and Reagan believe that instruction should follow a basic sequence of instruction. There should be an introduction to your lesson, a body, and of course a closure. Now, if you've ever been in any planning process for a lesson, if you're currently teaching, if you're not, don't forget one of the goals of this course is for you to actually plan your distance education lesson, because no matter what setting you're in, if you're going to be a distance education instructor, at some point you're going to have to plan instruction. So you're going to have to know about that sequence, the introduction, the body, and the closure. But if you're already a teacher, you're going to notice that you typically do these events or these activities whenever you're dealing with your sequence of instruction. Now, that sequence of instruction, of course, is an introduction where you get the attention or the arousal of your students. You establish that instructional purpose, and then you give a preview of the lesson. Now, during the body of the lesson is when you want to take time to recall any prior knowledge, give students examples, and focus their attentions. And now you want to use your learning strategies here. Give them an opportunity to practice what you have given them. Take time to evaluate that and employ any more learning strategies. Now, of course, you always want to close a lesson, and that may mean you want to summarize or review or even do an assessment of what they've learned. Okay. Again, now when you're applying these instructional strategies to building your distance education course, yes, you will have to consider a few other things. However, remember that you will need an instructional design model to create your course. So far, we've learned about analyzing the audience and the learning environment and learning tasks. So make sure before you jump into planning your DE course that you remember the elements of the Smith and Reagan model, especially since it's good for large amounts of instruction. Now, you can use the Smith and Reagan model if that's your choice, but that's just the only one you've seen so far. You will see others. Now, class, that's all for today. I hope you found this information useful, even if it wasn't the most entertaining lesson. Be sure to complete the assessment for segment 2 and see you again in segment 3.